The grocery store smelled of bleach and desperation, a place where dreams went to die under fluorescent lights. Marcus Jackson, 6'3" and built like a linebacker, didn't expect to be a hero when he grabbed his cart that morning. He was just a man, 38, tired from a double shift at the factory, pushing through the aisles of Harper's Market to grab milk, bread, and maybe a moment of peace. But peace was a luxury in a town like Eldridge, where old wounds festered, and the air carried whispers of hate. The trouble started near the canned goods, where a young mother, Elena Ruiz, fumbled with her toddler's stroller while balancing a basket. Her dark hair clung to her sweaty forehead, and her eyes darted nervously as three men, white, loud, and reeking of cheap beer, closed in. They wore faded trucker hats and smirks that promised trouble. "Go back to where you came from," one sneered, his voice cutting through the hum of the store. Elena froze, clutching her son, Mateo, whose tiny hands gripped her sleeve. The men laughed, their voices growing louder, uglier. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," another said, stepping closer. The third, a wiry guy with a tattooed neck, knocked a can of beans from her basket. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Marcus, 2 aisles over, heard the commotion. His first instinct was to keep walking. He'd seen this before. Hell, he'd lived it. Growing up black in Eldridge meant dodging slurs like punches, learning to shrink yourself to fit a world that didn't want you. But something about Elena's trembling voice, the way she whispered please to her son, stopped him cold. He set his cart aside and moved toward the sound, his work boots heavy on the linoleum. By the time he rounded the corner, the scene was a powder keg. The three men had Elena boxed in, their laughter sharp and cruel. Shoppers nearby pretended not to see, their carts squeaking as they hurried away. Elena's eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, defiance flickering beneath her fear. Mateo whimpered, his small body pressed against her. Marcus took it all in the men's taunts, the mother's courage, the child's terror. His blood boiled, but he kept his voice steady. "Back off," he said, stepping into the aisle. His presence filled the space, broad shoulders blocking the light. The leader, a stocky man with a red face, turned, sizing Marcus up. "Mind your business, boy," he spat, the word dripping with venom. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd heard that word 1,000 times, each one a cut. But today it didn't land the same. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "I said back off. Now." The air thickened, the hum of the store fading as every eye turned to them. The bullies hesitated, their bravado flickering. Marcus wasn't just tall, was unyielding, his gaze a wall they couldn't climb. The wiry one with the tattoo sneered, trying to regain control. "What, you her bodyguard now?" He shoved past Elena, knocking her basket to the ground. Cans rolled, and Mateo cried out. That was the spark. Marcus moved faster than he thought possible, planting himself between Elena and the men. "You touch her again," he said, his voice a growl, "and you'll wish you hadn't." The threat wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who'd had enough. The slurs, the stares, the world that told him to stay small. The stocky leader laughed, but it was nervous now, his eyes darting to his friends. "You think you're tough?" he said, stepping forward. Marcus didn't budge. He could feel Elena behind him, her breath ragged, and Mateo's soft sobs. The store was silent now, save for the faint buzz of the lights. Shoppers watched from a distance, phones discreetly raised, recording. Marcus didn't care. This wasn't about them. It was about the woman and her child, about the line he was tired of seeing crossed. The tension snapped when the wiry guy lunged, swinging a wild fist. Marcus caught his wrist midair, twisting just enough to make the man wince. "Walk away," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. The other two froze, their confidence crumbling. The leader muttered something under his breath, but the fight was gone from his eyes. They backed off, slinking toward the exit, their curses fading into the distance. Marcus didn't move until they were gone, his heart pounding but his face a mask of resolve. Elena exhaled, her knees buckling slightly as she hugged Matteo. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to say something profound, but all that came out was, "You okay?" She nodded, tears spilling over. Matteo peeked up at him, his small face streaked with tears but curious now, unafraid. Marcus managed a small smile, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're a tough kid," he said. The store manager, a nervous man in a cheap tie, appeared, muttering about calling security. Marcus ignored him, helping Elena gather her scattered groceries. The crowd dispersed, some whispering, others staring. A few clapped awkwardly, as if they'd watched a performance. Marcus felt their eyes but kept his focus on Elena. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised, then nodded. "I'm Elena," she said, extending a trembling hand. "Marcus," he replied, shaking it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. By evening, the video, grainy but powerful, was all over social media. "Black man stands up to racist bullies" trended on X, the comments a mix of praise, outrage, and the usual venom. Marcus didn't have a phone fancy enough to keep up, but his sister, Tanya, called him that night, her voice shaking with pride and worry. "You're viral, Mark," she said. "People are talking about you like you're some kind of hero." He laughed, but it was hollow. "I just did what was right," he said. Tanya paused. "That's why you're a hero." The next day, Harper's Market was busier than usual. People came not to shop but to gawk, to see where it happened. Marcus went back, not because he wanted to but because he needed coffee and eggs. He braced for stares, but instead he found something else. A woman, older, white, approached him in the produce section. "You're the guy from the video," she said, her voice soft. "My daughter's married to a Mexican man. What you did, it means something." She pressed a crumpled note into his hand, a thank you scrawled in shaky handwriting. Before he could respond, she was gone. Others followed. A black teenager fist bumped him, grinning. "You showed 'em, man." A Latina cashier slipped him a free coffee, her eyes shining. "For Elena," she whispered. Marcus felt the weight of their gratitude but also their expectations. He wasn't a symbol, he was just a man. But the town was changing, or at least trying to. A local pastor organized a community meeting at the rec center, inviting Marcus and Elena to speak. Marcus hesitated, wasn't one for speeches, but Elena convinced him. "They need to hear from you," she said. "Not the video, not the story. You." The meeting was packed, standing room only. Marcus stood at the podium, his hands gripping the edges. He looked out at the faces, black, white, Latino, young, old, skeptical, hopeful. Elena sat in the front row, Matteo on her lap, watching him. He cleared his throat. "I'm not a hero," he began, his voice rough. "I'm just tired. Tired of seeing people hurt for who they are. Tired of staying quiet." The room was silent, hanging on his words. "What happened in that store wasn't about me. It was about Elena, about her son, about all of us who've been told we don't belong. We do. And we're not going anywhere." The applause started slow, then roared. Elena wiped her eyes, smiling. The pastor took the mic, calling for unity, for action. People stood, some crying, others nodding. A local activist group formed that night, named Stand Together. They plan marches, workshops, even a scholarship fund for kids like Mateo. Marcus didn't want the spotlight, but he couldn't deny the ripple effect. Eldridge was really talking for the first time in years. But not everyone was clapping. The bullies from the store weren't done. Marcus learned their names: Travis, Cole, and Dana, local troublemakers with a history of stirring up hate. They didn't take kindly to being humiliated online. Late one night, Marcus found his truck's tires slashed, a racial slur spray-painted on the hood. He stared at it under the streetlight, his fists clenched. Tanya wanted him to call the cops, but Marcus knew better. In Eldridge, justice wasn't always blind. Instead, he cleaned the paint himself, the chemical smell burning his nose as he scrubbed. The harassment didn't stop. Threatening notes appeared in his mailbox. Anonymous calls woke him at 3 a.m. Elena faced it too. Her car was egged, her mailbox stuffed with hate mail, but she refused to back down. She and Marcus started meeting regularly, not just to plan community events but to support each other. "They want us scared," Elena said one evening, sipping coffee at her small kitchen table. "But I'm done being scared." Marcus nodded, feeling a kinship he hadn't expected. They were different, him a black factory worker, her a Latina single mom, but their fight was the same. The movement grew. Stand Together organized a march through downtown Eldridge, 100 strong. Marcus walked at the front, Elena beside him, Mateo holding her hand. Signs read "Unity over Hate" and "Eldridge for All." Counter-protesters shouted from the sidelines, but their voices were drowned out by the marchers' chants. Marcus felt the ground shake with their steps, a pulse of something bigger than himself. He wasn't a leader by choice, but he was learning to carry the weight. By the 6-month mark, Stand Together had opened a community center, offering free tutoring and job training. Elena ran the youth program, her laughter filling the halls as she taught kids like Mateo to dream big. Marcus took on mentorship, sharing his story with young men who saw themselves in him. The town wasn't fixed. Hate didn't vanish overnight, but it was trying. And that was enough for now. The threats didn't stop with slashed tires. Travis, Cole, and Danny, the trio from the grocery store, weren't content to let Marcus and Elena's movement take root. Eldridge was their turf, they believed, and they saw Stand Together as a direct challenge. Marcus noticed them lurking outside the community center, at the edge of marches, their eyes glinting with malice. He didn't tell Elena at first, not wanting to worry her, but she sensed it. "They're not done with us," she said one evening, her voice steady but her hands tight around her coffee mug. Marcus nodded, his jaw set. "Let 'em try." The first real escalation came a month after the march. The community center's front window was shattered, a brick lying among the glass with "Go Home" scrawled in red paint. Marcus arrived at dawn, called by the center's volunteer coordinator. He stood in the cold, staring at the damage, his breath visible in the morning air. Volunteers gathered, their faces a mix of anger and resolve. Elena showed up with Mateo, her eyes blazing. "They think this'll stop us?" she said, picking up a broom. "They're wrong." By noon, the community had rallied. Local businesses donated glass. A hardware store owner helped with repairs. The center reopened that evening, stronger than before. But the attacks grew bolder. One night, Marcus found a Molotov cocktail, unlit, on his porch. The glass bottle gleamed under his motion sensor light, stuffed with a rag and reeking of gasoline. He called Tanya, who begged him to leave town. "You're in over your head, Mark," she said, her voice cracking. "These guys aren't playing." Marcus didn't argue, but he didn't pack a bag either. He'd spent his life running from fights he didn't choose. Not this time. Elena faced her own battles. Her landlord, a jittery man with ties to Travis's family, threatened eviction over noise complaints that didn't exist. Anonymous flyers appeared in her neighborhood, calling her a troublemaker, an outsider. Mateo came home from school one day, his backpack torn, saying kids had called him names. Elena held him close, her heart breaking, but she didn't waver. She and Marcus leaned on each other, their bond forged in shared defiance. "We're stronger than they think," Marcus told her one night, as they planned the center's next event. Elena smiled, but her eyes were tired. "I hope you're right." The breaking point came at the Stand Together Festival, a celebration of unity planned for Eldridge's town square. The event was the movement's biggest yet food trucks, live music, kids painting murals on temporary walls. Marcus and Elena had worked for weeks, rallying volunteers, securing permits. The square buzzed with life, families of every color laughing, dancing, sharing plates of tamales and barbecue. For a moment, Eldridge felt like the town it could be. Then Travis and his crew showed up. They didn't blend into their boots stomped too loud, their laughter too sharp. Marcus spotted them near the stage, where a local band played. Travis held a beer can, his eyes locked on Marcus. Cole and Danny flanked him, their faces twisted with intent. Marcus alerted the volunteers, keeping his voice calm. "Keep the crowd safe," he said. "I'll handle this." Elena overheard, grabbing his arm. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. Marcus shook his head. "This is mine." He approached the trio, his steps deliberate. The music faded into the background, the crowd's chatter dimming as people noticed the tension. "You're not welcome here," Marcus said, his voice carrying. Travis smirked, crushing his beer can. "This is our town," he said, stepping closer. "You and your little friends don't get to change that." Cole cracked his knuckles. Danny spat on the ground. The air was electric, every eye on them. Marcus stood tall, his heart steady. "This town belongs to everyone," he said. "You don't get to decide who stays." The words landed like a challenge, and Travis's smirk vanished. He lunged, swinging a fist. Marcus dodged, grabbing Travis's arm and twisting it behind his back. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others shouting. Cole rushed in, but Marcus shoved Travis into him, sending both stumbling. Danny hesitated, his bravado fading as volunteers formed a loose circle, phones recording. "Enough!" Elena's voice cut through the chaos. She pushed through the crowd, Mateo at her side, and stood beside Marcus. "You want to fight?" she said, her voice fierce. "Fight me. Fight my son. Fight every person here who's tired of your hate." The crowd roared, their voices rising in support. Travis, pinned by Marcus, glared but said nothing. Cole and Danny backed off, their eyes darting nervously. The police arrived, late as usual, and took the trio away in cuffs. The charges assault, disturbing the peace wouldn't stick long, but the message was clear. Eldridge wasn't theirs anymore. The festival resumed, louder, prouder. Marcus and Elena stood together, watching Mateo join other kids at the mural wall, painting a bright sun. "We did this," Elena said, her voice soft. Marcus nodded, his chest tight. "Yeah, we did." The aftermath wasn't simple. Travis and his crew faced community backlash, their names synonymous with hate. Some in Eldridge defended them, claiming free speech, but their voices were drowned out by Stand Together's growing influence. The community center expanded, funded by donations from across the state. Marcus and Elena became reluctant leaders, their story inspiring similar movements in nearby towns. They spoke at schools, churches, even city council meetings, always together, their friendship a symbol of resilience. But the cost was real. Marcus couldn't sleep without checking his locks. Elena worried every time Matteo left for school. They carried the weight of a town's hopes, and it was heavy. One night, over pizza at Elena's apartment, Marcus admitted his doubts. "What if we're just shouting into the void?" he asked. Elena set down her slice, her eyes fierce. "Then we shout louder," she said. "For Matteo. For every kid who needs to know they belong." Marcus smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "You're tougher than me," he said. She laughed. "Damn right." A year after the grocery store incident, Stand Together held a candlelight vigil in the town square. Hundreds gathered, their candles flickering in the dusk. Marcus and Elena stood on a small stage, Matteo between them, holding their hands. Marcus spoke first, his voice rough but clear. "We're not perfect," he said. "This town, this world, it's messy. But we choose who we fight for. I choose you. All of you." Elena followed, her words simple but powerful. "Hate wants us to hide. Love makes us stand. Keep standing." The vigil ended with a song, led by the same band from the festival. The crowd swayed, their voices rising, a chorus of defiance and hope. Marcus looked out, seeing faces he'd grown up with, faces he'd feared, faces he'd learned to trust. Eldridge wasn't healed, but it was healing, and that was enough. The movement spread beyond Eldridge. News outlets picked up the story, calling Marcus and Elena the heart of a new civil rights wave. They shrugged off the label, focusing on the work, more centers, more marches, more conversations. Matteo, now a year older, started a kids' club at the center, teaching his friends to stand up like Mr. Marcus. Elena cried when she saw their first meeting, a dozen kids painting signs that read, "We are enough." Marcus never wanted to be a hero, but he became one. Not because he was fearless, but because he was tired of silence, tired of hate, tired of a world that told him to shrink. He and Elena built something bigger than themselves, a legacy of courage that would outlast them. Eldridge changed, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. And it started with a man, a mother, and a moment in a grocery store. What would you have done in that aisle? How do you stand when hate tries to push you down?